Well, good morning. My name is Matt Lesak. I work in the global product marketing team for MobileIron. I'm a senior product strategist. I'm actually based out of Tampa, Florida, so I'm remote from HQ. I spend a lot of my time in front of customers and partners, and the other area of focus that I do within MobileIron is I'm responsible for the Android messaging. So I wore my Android green today. The Google I/O is going on, so I'm talking about M, and then N is about to be released here shortly. So be a lot of good stuff that's already been talked about. But if you didn't catch yesterday's keynote, we're going to have Google come tomorrow for the closing keynote to do a wrap-up. So if you hang around until then, you get to see get a quick wrap-up right from Google themselves. So today I want to talk about Android M, which is Marshmallow. Sticky and secure was my little creative way of coming up with, the first thing I think of Marshmallow is I got 4 kids. It's like a mess, but was really excited when it came out. A lot of good enhancements, and I'll jump through what I'm going to cover here. The way I kind of, when I explain to customers what Marshmallow brings to the table is that it's sweetening the pot, right? So it's an add-on what Lollipop kind of laid down from a foundation perspective, and I'll jump in and talk about that in the first section. And then we'll talk about what they did from an app and data security perspective in this release, providing you, the IT folks, more additional control from an operating system perspective, and then from the end user perspective, what they did from a productivity enhancements. I'm not covering every feature that's in M. There was a lot in there. I just picked on certain highlights of that release. So Marshmallow 101. So it was announced in Q2 of last year. It launched in October. So that's, again, I'm curious to see what they do with N because it seems to be moving a little bit quicker. Again, we never know what Android or what Google's going to be doing until they actually release the product. But it seems to be that they're going to be in more of an accelerated track this year, but we'll have to wait and see what they actually do there. This is one of my favorite charts, and where I'm getting this information is from Google's webpage. You will get a copy of this presentation, and in the presentation there's a link to where I get this information. You can check on this. It changes. They update it every month. Essentially, what they're doing is they're looking at the devices that are connecting into Google Play, getting their apps, doing their, that's where everybody goes, right? That's the central repository for everything in Google. And they're gathering this information. So this was of April stats. So from an adoption perspective, and the reason I throw this up there, so if you go back to October, and now this data is from April, that Marshmallow is at 7.5% adoption rate. And if you've been dealing with Android, you kind of know where this is driven from. This is driven from the ecosystem, right? It's one platform, but many devices. So with that many devices, you get challenges as far as OEM supporting new releases, carriers doing their testing and their QAing around updates, and especially when new platforms come out, especially in Marshmallow is no exception. Where that is in the and how it impacts the adoption rates versus if you're looking at iOS, right? So Apple owns the whole stack; they own the software and the hardware. Those are much more rapidly adopted from versus when you look at Android. Now, actually, it's May. I left the date in there. Sorry, this is May data. This is, May 2nd. What Google's doing in this space, and I know they talked about it at Google I/O, is that they're doing as much as they can to encourage the OEMs and the carriers and everybody that touches those devices before they go out to the market to do more rapid adoption and get this rate increase, right? So you're not looking at this several months after the launch of a product of a platform and you're only at 7.5% adoption rates. Now, if you go back to Lollipop, if you look at Lollipop, depending on 5 or 5.1, I tend to more focus on the 5.1 releases. That's at 19%, and that's been out since November of 2014. So it's just the nature of the ecosystem that Google is addressing, but it is what it is. So shoring up the gaps. So Lollipop was significant in a sense that what really changed from Google's perspective is they laid the foundation of where they were going with the Android platform. So one of the big ones is they switched to SE Linux. That was a dramatic shift for them on the platform perspective, a much more hardened version of Linux. And then shortly after Lollipop was announced, they announced what they called the Android for Work platform, which was tied to their Google for Work platform. And what that did was Google's foray into, hey, we actually have this native container that's built into the OS that enterprise customers are going to want to be able to leverage. It changed dramatically what they were doing previously, prior to Lollipop, which they didn't have a container, right? They were relying on folks like MobileIron to come up with a solution to help secure, the apps and the data on that device. So it was a dramatic shift. They laid the foundation. They caught a lot of the industry off guard. Everybody was like, what did they just announce? What was, Android for Work? Okay, great. So what is it? So that came out early last year. And with Marshmallow, what had changed is what I was waiting for to see, okay, hey, are they really serious about Android for Work? Is this really where they're going to be going? And with Marshmallow, it was very, very clear. Tons and tons of enhancements, specifically on Android for Work, adding additional use cases into the mix, shoring up in some of the gaps that they were initially released in the initial release with Lollipop. So if you're not familiar with Android for Work, it's tied to the OS, right? So Lollipop has its certain feature sets that it'll support in that platform, and then Marshmallow is going to add onto it. And if you've looked at N or any of the N preview, they added even more use cases and functionality specific for the enterprise. So Marshmallow really solidified it for me personally. It's okay, yeah, they're really serious about this. They're committed. Second release now, and now N is going to be the third release, third iteration of that solution on the platform. So from a use case perspective, they touched on several different features that were specific for enterprise IT. So if you're looking within the enterprise, they added additional functionality for BYOD, for kiosks, like what I would consider a true kiosk mode. And this is a graphic that our team developed, and I thought it was great because it kind of shows the merging too, right? So there's the blueprint, here comes Android, right? And they got the whole platform, and now it's merging and it's evolving in this space. And N is going to be no exception, right? So if you haven't looked at it, what they've publicly said about it, really, if you really want to know what they're doing, look at the developer. Go to developer.android.com, and that's where the rubber meets the road, what they're really doing in that space. So strengthening app and data security. If you're an iOS user, this is something that was familiar to you, specifically an 8 and then even more so in iOS 9. But what I loved about this is, how many of you, installed an application on Android and you got that laundry list of, hey, this app wants to basically do everything it needs to do on your phone in order for you to use it. Do you accept or deny? It was either you're on board or you're not. So what they changed in Marshmallow is they said, hey, Mr. Developer, why not? We're going to come up with this standard that your app has a minimum footprint that you need in order to function. And if you need additional access to resources on that device, we're going to prompt the user. So this is an example where the Snazzy app is being launched and it needs access to the user's contacts. So the user is now getting prompted saying, hey, you're launching this app and it needs access to your contacts. Do you want to allow it or deny it? And do you want to just always allow it in or not? So the flip side of this, and I'll show you in a bit, is you can now look in one location to find out what each of these applications have requested from a resource perspective, and you can go in and change it. So maybe you were using a camera application, and that you allowed camera and contacts, and maybe thought about it afterwards. Maybe that wasn't a good idea. I don't want access to my contacts. You can go back in and turn that permission off. What it also does, from an administrative perspective, it allows you as an admin for the applications that you're deploying and managing to go in and control some of those permissions. Now, the caveat is, in order for this functionality to work, the developer has to adopt the Marshmallow API. So once they've got to that API level, then these can be leveraged. If they haven't, it falls back to the Lollipop type permissioning structure. So if you haven't seen it in an app yet, or your developers, if you have hired or contracted developers, or you have in-house developers, I would highly encourage you to tell them that, hey, look, if we're going to be writing Android apps to get up on the current API, there's really no excuse for them now that's it's been out since October. But this is what you'll gain. You get a lot more granularity and control and visibility in what each of these applications are doing within the platform. This one I kind of chuckle because if you were around when Lollipop was announced, this was the same statement they made then. With Lollipop, encryption is mandatory on a device that they're going to be using Android for work. Well, they kind of had to reel back on that because of the OEMs did not design the devices to support the whole device encryption, so a lot of them got bricked or they became so slow they weren't even usable. I talked to many customers that tried to do this on particular devices, and it was just not acceptable. They had to revert back. But in Marshmallow, they provide more clarity on what they meant by that. They said, hey, by default, encryption should be mandatory, and there are going to be exceptions. So for devices that like an Android Wear watch or a purpose-built device that does one thing and one thing really, really well, where encryption doesn't really make sense, they did make exceptions. But new devices that are coming out to support Marshmallow by default, it should not be an issue, right? All the manufacturers are on board, they get it, and why this is important. If you didn't realize or weren't aware, if you do use Android for work, the whole device encryption is a requirement. You can't do it without it. Fingerprint API. So this is another interesting story behind this. So prior to Marshmallow, the OEMs came up with their own solutions around fingerprint, right? Responding to what Apple was doing and others in this space, saying, hey, biometrics is important. Users really like it. It's secure, but it's easy to use, easy to leverage. And the interesting part about it, so the OEMs came up with their own methodology. Several of them got shot down really fast because of the methods they were using weren't secure. So it's fingerprints, and one of them, they were storing fingerprints in the clear, which is a bad idea. So Google stepped up and said, you know what, we're going to come out with a standard, make it part of the platform, and Marshmallow brings that to bear. What we're doing from a MobileIron perspective is you're going to see this very shortly built into the client, right? So if the device A has a fingerprint reader, that's one of the requirements, right? So physically it has to have the reader because there's a lot of devices that do support Marshmallow that don't have fingerprint. Marshmallow now supports that natively. And then we will be incorporating that into our products as well, so the users can leverage that in there. But the good thing is now as part of the platform, it's secured. Google supports it, right? It's native and it's in the right, what I would call the pecking order as far as from a security model and what's the most secure versus least secure option. Chrome custom tabs. Now, from a user and developer perspective, this was a shift because for those of you who are familiar with WebView, that was a service that's been available on the Android platform for developers to call and render pages or anything that required a rendering of HTML on the device. That was the service that they would call. The challenge is that there was no customization available. The interface couldn't. I would say the consistency of that user experience varied depending on the device you were on. So Google said, okay, we want to come up with a better method where we can allow developers to leverage the Chrome platform, right, the Chrome browser inside the app, but allow them to customize it for the look and feel so that the user, from a user experience, you're within an app, you need to call out to, and this one is using Pinterest, showing something rendering in HTML. It doesn't have to leave that application in order to get that page and that information. This is in-app, it's customized, right? So the developers can make it the theme and the look and feel as part of their application. But from an IT perspective, the value is you're getting better security, right? Because the Chrome browser gets updated a lot, right? On even desktops, laptops, and on the Android platform is no exception. So more frequent updates, more security patches. You can leverage a lot of the same lockdowns that you're doing if you're leveraging those within the Chrome browser. It's all transparent to the end user within this change, right? So Google is going to eventually sunset the WebView service on the platform, and it's all going to shift to the Chrome custom tab functionality on the device. So, providing IT more control. So this one I focused specifically on the Android for Work enhancements that were in Marshmallow. These are not all of them. I picked on some of them, and this one I think it was a little too long, but I wanted to make sure I just called out some of them. So system update and auto acceptance. From an administrative perspective, if you're managing the device, right? So you have the basically the device is being 100% managed by you, owned by the organization. You can now manage the updates that occur on the device. So if, let's say, Marshmallow comes out, you can delay it, right? You can say, hey, 30 days, I don't want this coming out day one, I don't want the user being prompt. You can now have options on when you're going to allow that update to occur on that device. You can't block it entirely, but you do have options, right? You can delay it and give your developers or those devices more time to test before you say, hey, yes, we want to accept that update and push it out. And then you can also set it to say, just automatically take the update. Don't prompt the user, it's completely silent in the background, and the device updates itself. Data usage tracking. So a lot of customers have come to us around this, especially on the international side. So when people travel internationally, or where data plans are extremely expensive and the expense goes back to corporate, right? So it's an expenditure that they need to manage. They want to manage around data. This data usage tracking capability within the platform now is available, so you can look and say, oh, how much data is being used by which apps. They can get those reports. They can pull that API. You can put caps on it. Me personally, I've seen much higher success at this at the carrier level, right? So working with your carriers is put caps on it. But again, if that's not an option, this feature within Marshmallow can be leveraged so that you can, from a business perspective, you can manage that expenditure and put rates or limits on it so that you're not getting a bill out of the blue for a $1,000 data plan, which I've heard horror stories from customers that travel that have a workforce that's heavily internationally traveling. Fingerprint compliance. So what this means is if the device, if your priority is fingerprint, right? So you're saying this is the most secure, and that's what you're choosing to do. If for whatever reason that device falls out of compliance, maybe the fingerprints are removed or the user never does fingerprint, right? You can then fall back to passcode. So it gives you that option of saying, hey, look, we want fingerprint, but if they did meet that criteria and the device falls out of compliance, you can then force passcode, right? So the passcode has to be there, so there's a fallback for that device. Runtime permission management, this is going back to my previous slide, right? So you can actually manage some of the runtime permissions. I played around with this quite a bit, so I would say, hey, allow the Google camera, the default camera app, to never allow access to my camera. So it kind of defeats the whole app, but again, it's something that you can manage. If you're doing the work profile, that's where you would do it. You say, look, I don't want them, the camera app is there, but I don't ever want them to, maybe I want them to take pictures, but I don't want to allow them to get uploaded into Google Photos. Or it gives you a lot of options there of what apps can do within the platform that makes sense within your enterprise. But wait, there's more. This one I love from a UI perspective. So when you're running an application in Android for Work, there's this nice subtle hint down here. There's actually a couple visual ones. I tried to get a better rendering of this. I know it's a little bit blurry. But on the bottom, I know I have a pointer on here, don't I? On the bottom, you'll see this briefly pops up and then fades away. It reminds the user, hey, you're in your work profile, meaning you're in an app that is being managed by your enterprise, just to give them a nice visual cue to remind them this is not your personal, this is actually work. And then up here, you'll see the little briefcase. So when that app is active, that little briefcase icon goes up there to remind the user again that they're actually using an application that's being managed within the work profile. So productivity boosts. Google Now on tap. When they first announced this at Google I/O, I was trying to figure out what they did here, and essentially, I put this in the notes. This is how they explain it. understanding the context of the moment. And if you haven't played around with this, this is really, really cool. Essentially, an example, and I pulled this right off of their developer website, the user is doing a text message between her friend. They ask him, hey, what about this one restaurant? And essentially what they're doing in this second screen here is they never had to leave the app to do a search. They just hold down the home button, and from a UI perspective, you see this little G pop up, and it scans the screen. It scans and looks what's contextually on the screen, and picked up that she mentioned this restaurant, and then came up with a review, and then gave her options. Hey, do you want to call them? Do you want to look them up on Yelp? Maybe make a reservation in OpenTable, or navigate via Google Apps. Massive productivity gain. The user doesn't have to leave the application, doesn't have to do a search, doesn't have to go back in the app to send that information. I love this feature. I use this all the time. And it takes a while to kind of unwire your brain because you're not used to that, right? You're used to going, oh, hang on, let me go on Google Maps. Oh, let me go back. Let me copy and paste that, send that back. You just hold down the button. It does a Google search right on the screen that you're looking at and gives you back what it feels is relevant results. I love it. I've had people that I know that have used it. I've said, hey, if you're using Google Now on tap, and they're like, yeah, this thing is, nobody's gone, it's okay. I think it's been really well received, and I think end users, once they are aware that this is there, and if you're messing around with your home button enough, you'll see it kind of pop up, and it gives them like a little visual cue. It doesn't do it unless you hold it down. I think it's it's maybe 1 second or longer. It'll actually pop up and then do the search for you. But it's very contextual. Google's going to be doing even more in that, and end. You're going to see even more enhancements around that. But again, end users would like it. And then think about it from a corporate environment. If you're going to be doing mapping, if you're going to do anything that's contextual inside that application, you can take advantage of that. Especially when you're developers, there's ways that they can actually embed inside their code that enhances this feature, so that it's not strictly relying on that contextual screen grab. App links. So what this is I love this from a security perspective. If those of you who've been using Android long enough, you know that if you go and launch, you're within an app, right? So I'll just pick on Twitter. Somebody sends you a Twitter, there's a link, right, that somebody sends or posts on a Twitter feed. You go to hit it. What did Google do in the past, right? What did Android do in the past? They say, hey, there's these 18 apps that they can handle this particular function call. Which one do you want to use? Do you want to use it all the time? From an end user perspective, it's really annoying, but from a security perspective, it's even more concerning, because what if you don't want them using a particular application? You want to make sure that they're using the proper app. Not only that, you want to make sure that the source that's requesting this feed is going to the right app. So let me show you what I mean. If you look up here, there's the Amazon app. If you take a look at the app link, it says, hey, any of these applications going to these URLs, that's us, right? Launch that inside the Amazon app. There's no other reason for it to go anywhere else. And it's not as simple as them just saying, hey, these are our URLs, because if I was a hacker, what would be the first thing I'd do? I'd write an app and say, no, I'm www.amazon.com or .whatever, and those are my apps. So in the background, the developers have to go and work with Google to prove, yes, we are Amazon, and they actually put strings inside of their websites that it looks for to prove. So it's a secondary authentication method, per se, to prove that they are the single source of truth. They are Amazon.com. The string is there, it's on their website, and it'll direct them to the proper application. So better user experience, but it's a lot more secure and less prompting to the user, and they actually go into the app that they're supposed to. So looking at Evernote, they can actually go in and find out more information. Hey, what links are supported? What do you want to do? What was the selection? Do you want to open it every single time? They can go in there, they can change it, and then you can manage this as well on the enterprise side for the applications that you're managing for your end users. Great feature. I think this is going to help, again, push Android forward in the right direction from a user perspective and from a security perspective. You can actually, and again, it gets very, very granular, but if you notice, it's like, 30,000 feet and you're getting down to 10,000 and 5,000. But again, most users aren't going to look there, but the information is there if you need to gather it and take a look at what's claiming to be, who owns which app in the space. And it's a very welcome feature.